When you look at the Dragon Ball series and how many characters that have gotten stronger from the beginning, from Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super, and even Dragon Ball GT, everybody seems to have appreciated in value when it comes to strength. But Yamcha, it doesn't seem like he's the same case. And to discuss this topic, alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I am joined with Mike from Laughingstock Media as we're going to be talking about how weak is Yamcha actually, as there is a new arc of Dragon Ball Super coming up, and he is not on the poster. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video, as we recently saw in a recent episode of Dragon Ball Super that Yamcha got taken out at a baseball game. So Mike, why don't you take the honors and open us up today?
Okay, so a lot of people seem to believe that Yamcha is incredibly weak, and really by Dragon Ball standards, it really seems to be the case that he's always surrounded by characters who are significantly more powerful than he is, so like, no matter what he does, no matter how hard he seems to train, if he even does, it seems like Yamcha has never been able to really catch up to anyone. For instance, in the initial, when we first see Yamcha for the first time in Dragon Ball, we see that Yamcha is only ever really able to get the better of Goku when Goku is hungry, so he's weakened. Back when Dragon Ball, they had Goku's weakness of being weakened by hunger, which doesn't really show up anymore. And Yamcha was able to get the better of him at that point, but the second Goku got all of that food back in him, well, he pretty much took Yamcha to the woodshed, and he beat him pretty bad, now didn't he, Qaaman?
Yes, he did.
So pretty much it seems like even from an early point, Yamcha was starting out kind of weaker than Goku, and then when they introduced Krillin, it was obvious from that point that Yamcha was also not as powerful as Krillin, who also himself seemed like a prodigy, kind of like Goku. Even though Yamcha did eventually go to train with the Master Roshi, it was still, that he seemed to be Master Roshi's weakest disciple. And then when they introduced Tien, Tien was, of course, already stronger than Yamcha as well, because even though they had that awesome fight in Dragon Ball, Yamcha still got the better of him. Yamcha still got beaten down by Tien and ultimately had his leg broken in a really horrible way. So even in Dragon Ball, it seemed like Yamcha was always kind of like the weakest member of the team, aside from like Chaozu and Puar and Oolong and people like that.
Right. Now, let's fast forward a little bit, Mike. Now, when we get into Dragon Ball Z, obviously, here is where things get interesting. So Yamcha obviously trains in preparation for the Saiyan threat. Because of how Yamcha was handling the Cybermen, you could say that Yamcha was, a good deal stronger than Raditz at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z, because of the fact that he did defeat that Cyberman. And I think that what a lot of people, fail to realize is, yes, he got caught off guard, but in terms of the actual fight, Yamcha dominated the Cyberman completely. He beat him fair and square. He just lost his guard and got blown up in the process. Now, after this, Yamcha goes on to train with King Kai, and later on, if we look at more of the filler elements of the Buu arc, Yamcha once again trains, and he even takes on Olibu, who held his own somewhat against the suppressed Pikkon. So what we're getting at here is that there have been ups and downs of time where Yamcha's trained and where he hasn't trained for the Android arc, and then obviously chilling for the Buu arc, and then training again in the Afterlife. But the thing that is, I feel like Yamcha's too underrated in terms of power. And the reason why, Mike, is because if you look at Resurrection F, Yamcha wasn't in the fight. But in my opinion, even if Yamcha lost 99% of the power that he had during the Saiyan arc, or even if you say during, the Buu arc or any of that, it's hard for me to believe that he would be as low as Master Roshi.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Yamcha in Resurrection F pretty much just served as a joke. It was like, oh, I just left Yamcha and Chaozu behind. So it's pretty much equating Yamcha and Chaozu as, like, the complete weaklings, whereas Master Roshi, who, to our knowledge, has not trained since Dragon Ball in the 22nd Tenkaichi Budokai, bringing him along doesn't really make a lot of sense in that regard, and he was able to get the better of plenty of the Frieza soldiers, despite them all being stronger than Raditz, I think.
And them knowing how to fly when he couldn't.
Yeah, exactly. So Yamcha really is not as weak as I guess they're really portraying him to be. You know, and Yamcha, even if Yamcha was like 1% now of his power that he was like at his peak, let's say that his peak was like during the Cell games, well, as far as I'm concerned, Yamcha's power level during the Cell Saga was probably at least like a million or in the low millions, so Yamcha would still be more powerful than pretty much everyone up until Captain Ginyu on Namek. So he's still really powerful compared to, like, the rest of the universe, but compared to the Z fighters, I mean, he might as well be a fly. Unless you count Beerus, because Yamcha was able to slap Beerus on the back, whereas Super Saiyan 3 Goku couldn't even come close to touching him. So then again, maybe the power scaling in Super is a little bit different than we thought.
I mean, Mike, honestly, you used the million, bro, but to be more generous, if Yamcha, like, if you say Yamcha had a power level of a 10,000, and let's not say 99, if he lost 90% of a power level of 10,000, that should be enough to put him over Master Roshi. You know, so, and not to mention, Yamcha's a lot younger. Yes, Master Roshi obviously is trained for many years, but you would think that with the more youthful body, he could maintain it at a much more efficient pace. So, it just doesn't make any sense to me how Master Roshi, and maybe he's not stronger than Yamcha, but it's portrayed that he's being looked at as more of a respectable fighter than Yamcha nowadays. And I think it's kind of a bummer because although Yamcha might not be the strongest guy, he does have some really cool techniques. And, you know, using the Spirit Bomb and using the Wolfang Fist, and he also knows the Kamehameha and stuff. And Yamcha is a skilled fighter. He's not as strong, but he is a skilled fighter. I do think it would be interesting to see him more in the series itself, but really, he's kind of just become a meme, don't you think?
I mean, pretty much. Even the most recent episode of Dragon Ball Super, where he was heavily featured, pretty much it all amounted to him ending up in the same position from the Saiyan saga, which he died, you know, the explosion in the crater, and Japan even made a figure of Yamcha in the crater, you know, dead. So, like, in Japan, Yamcha is pretty much a meme. Then they have that Dragon Ball spin-off where, like, some random school kid replaces Yamcha and ends up being a better version of Yamcha than him in the new manga, yes. So, you know, Yamcha is definitely more of a meme, but it's really funny when you think about it. If you were to take Yamcha and put him in, like, Marvel or DC, he'd be, like, one of the most dominant characters in the history of either of those comic book universes, just because of how powerful he is compared to other universes. But then you put him in Dragon Ball, and he's just, like, he's nothing, you know. These characters are so much above him at this point, and it doesn't help that half of the characters that he's competing against are super-powered aliens that can get hundreds of times stronger in like a year.
Yeah, and honestly, Mike, I think the other thing you should also use here, you know, before we close this out, is that if you look at the other humans like Tien and Krillin, I mean, what do you think they had that Yamcha didn't? You just think it was will or determination, or do you just think they were just naturally more gifted?
I think it's a combination, because really when you think about it, the way they were introduced was to be superior to, like, the other humans that were introduced aside from Goku. Like, Krillin, when he was introduced, like, he was running across water, and he was, you know, competing with Goku. He had already had training at the Orin Temple, whereas Yamcha had, you know, trained on his own, basically, in the middle of the wilderness when he was, you know, robbing people as Yamcha the Bandit. And then Tien, when he was introduced as a prodigy who might have even been more skilled than Goku, who could master these techniques just by seeing them, like, one time, and who had the ability to counter, like, the Kamehameha and use something like the Tri-Beam. So Yamcha really didn't have much of a chance from the beginning, just because the way that they always introduce new characters, and we've seen it, you know, ourselves with some of our favorite characters, they introduce someone who's way more powerful, and it pretty much just makes the other characters before them take a back seat, except for, like, Goku, because he's the main character, and that's kind of what Yamcha, I feel like, happened to him as a character.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and also to add to what you were saying about Tien, you remember, like, he trained with, you know, Tao and the Crane Hermit, so he was already training with very abnormally powerful human beings at that point in his life. But I think the ultimate thing here, though, Mike, is when you look at Yamcha, I do think that if you look at his power, he's definitely far beyond, you know, human capabilities. It's just hard for me to believe that he could be that weak to regular human standards, because if you don't train at all, I would still think your natural power could at least keep you that high, you know, because you can't equate all that superhuman training that he's gone through. I mean, look at Gohan, for example. Yes, Gohan's not, you know, obviously a full human, and Gohan went for a long period of time without training, but it's not like Gohan not training for 7 years made him a complete 100% wimp compared to everybody else. And I just think that although Yamcha's on a lower scale than Gohan, it just makes no sense for me to believe that they're making him out to be that weak. I mean, if you shot Yamcha, it shouldn't do anything. And if you look at the Buu Saga, they made some jokes, if you remember, Mike, how like they were looking for the Dragon Balls and like Yamcha was like scared that they were gonna get into a plane crash. It's like, come on, Yamcha, are you serious?
Yeah, I know. It's one of the things, though, like you bring it up, that's a good point. The whole training thing and not training never really made any sense, because Master Roshi didn't train for how long, and neither did the Crane Hermit, and both of them were still so much more powerful than every other human that was alive at the time. So obviously, you know, the whole not training thing never made any sense. And then Gohan doesn't seem to have gotten that much weaker in the 7 years, but in Dragon Ball Super, if you don't train for like a day, you're suddenly like weaker than you ever were in the past. You know, you're weaker than Namek characters, but let's not even get into that.
Yeah, I'm gonna make one more final analogy for you guys. It's like, the best example is to say, I go to the gym frequently. I go to the gym about 4 to 5 times a week on average. If I stopped going to the gym, I'm not going to be weaker than what I was 4 years ago. I mean, because my body's just naturally stronger, and also because of my age, I'm in my physical prime. So you just can't equate it. I know it's Dragon Ball, it's not fiction, you know, it's obviously fiction, but I just don't think you can compare apples and oranges. But so Mike, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out this video today, bro?
Yeah, regardless of how weak Yamcha is or how powerful, he'll still never be as powerful as even 1% of Harold's power.
With everything else said, guys, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys. And please check out Mike from Laughingstock Media in my description. And let us know what you think about how weak, not how strong, how weak you think Yamcha actually is.
Weaker than Harold.